I saw a conversation online today discussing the difference between a church, a nonprofit, and a 501c3. So I want to throw some details in here and hope that it helps a little bit. So in the United States, there is a type of organization called a nonprofit or a not-for-profit. This is different than a business. So a business actually operates in order to make money. A nonprofit or a not-for-profit operates for a specific mission, not with the goal of just making money. Now, of course, a nonprofit will bring money in, pay their staff, all those kind of things, but the functions are a little bit different. So in the United States, there's lots of different types of nonprofits. Churches would be one of them. Libraries, some schools are nonprofits. There's all sorts of not-for-profit organizations. And the U.S. tax code handles some of these different organizations differently. Now, in the U.S. tax code section 501c3, it lists several types of not-for-profit organizations. One of those is a church, and it actually talks about churches. So it is the way that the U.S. government recognizes churches. So guess what? If you're a church and you're in the United States, the government recognizes you as a church as a 501c3. It's actually by definition and default what you are. So all churches in the United States are 501c3s. Period. So every church is a 501c3. It's how the U.S. government describes churches in the tax code. Now, a church can take an additional step to reach out to the government and ask for something called a federal designation letter, which is basically asking the government to give you a written document that actually says you're a 501c3. Now, this doesn't change the nature of the church. It just actually gives the church a letter to be able to share, like, let's say with Myers, or if the church is making purchases, it can actually say, hey, here's my tax code from the federal government that proves to you, Myers, that I'm actually a church, that I'm actually a 501c3. So the letter doesn't make you a 501c3. It just actually designates you in writing for what you already are, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization church in the United States. So to recap, all churches are 501c3s. Some churches have a federal designation letter and a tax ID number that proves that they're a 501c3 organization. Now, a couple quick nuances. One thing is some churches that don't have a federal designation letter will point at other churches that have gone through the process to get a federal designation letter and say something like, hey, you're kind of bowing your knee to Caesar, or you're kind of into the government, and so God's not really working there. Well, here's the thing. Churches that have gone through the process of getting a designation letter don't have any different requirements than the ones that haven't. They're all 501c3s. They're the same type of organization in the government's eyes, even to the point of a lot of nonprofits that actually get a 501c3 federal designation letter have to file a document called a 990 annually to the federal government that talks about finances and stuff like that. But churches don't have to do that. The government doesn't want to be in that business of looking at churches' books. So if you're a church and you're a 501c3, which all of them are, whether you have a federal designation letter or not, you don't actually have to file federal documents or financial documents with the federal government. So the question would be this to your church: if your church does not have a designation letter and kind of points a finger at other churches and says, well, churches that have designation letters are bowing the knee to Caesar, I would ask whether your church that doesn't have a designation letter is actually still telling people that they can give and that their financial gifts are tax deductible. Because if your gift to your church is tax deductible, then guess what? Your church is not only a 501c3, which we already knew that, right? Because all churches are 501c3s, but your church is operating according to the government's permission to be a 501c3. So whether you have a federal designation letter or not really doesn't matter. There's no functional difference other than you've gone through some additional steps to get a tax ID number so that you can buy something from Myers without paying taxes on it. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Hopefully that clears up some of the confusion. All nonprofits are recognized by the government as such. Churches are recognized in tax code 501c3, and whether they have a federal designation letter and number or not, all churches are actually 501c3s and operate as nonprofit organizations in the United States. And the U.S. tax code just defines those churches in its tax code in section 501c3. Hopefully that helps. If you have questions, throw them in the comments or whatever. I'll do my best to respond. Hopefully that helps, guys, and enjoy your day. Have a great one.